and in the environmental health and safety field for 35 years. Most of my career was spent at Ball Aerospace and Technologies Corporation. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of Strategic Initiatives at the City and County of Broomfield. I'm really excited to be here.
I think your mic was on.
My name is Chris Gilbert. I represent the regulated community. I'm a water waste and mining compliance manager for Tri-State Generation and Transmission.
Good morning. I'm Stephen Gillette. I represent local government. I'm the solid waste director for Larimer County, and I'm still learning. I've only been in the trash industry for about 37 years.
Good morning. I'm Catherine Stewart. I represent the public at large, and this is my first year on the commission, and I'm a hydrogeologist / geologist working with Swift River Environmental.
Great. Well, thank you and welcome again. Start off with new business. If there's any public comments today, do we get any cards? All righty. So then we'll start into our formal rulemaking hearings. We have a first rulemaking today for the amendment to 6 CCR 1007-2 Part 1, Section 8.5.4 and 8.5.5 Facility Registration and General Site Requirements for Industrial Recycling Operations. And if you'll introduce yourself, make sure your mic is on, please. We have the right one up?
Yeah.
I think you read the wrong one, but I was sitting with solid waste, but I'm not part of it.
We're up to the 6 CCR 10073 Part 262, the amendments to the hazardous waste generator improvement rule.
Hold agenda up. Okay. Let's go ahead with that.
We good to go?
Yep.
All right, I'm David Foster. I'm an inspector with the Hazardous Materials Waste Management Division, the Compliance Assurance Unit. These amendments are based on the new generator rule that went into effect June 30th of this year. Because of the mass amount of changes within the rule, I think we're going to be finding some stuff that we missed, some typos, et cetera, that basically to keep up with the EPA, the stuff that we found that we need to change to maintain our accuracy. There's no major changes here. These are mainly just some, like I said, typographical errors and also some additions that we forgot to include back in the May hearing. So I was just going to use a statement on basis. Statement of basis and purpose to kind of go through the changes we're proposing today. Most of these are related to, as a state, we are more stringent than EPA in regards to requiring VSQGs that generate F1, 2, 4, or 5 hazardous waste, more than 3 gallons in a year. They're required to notify with us, and this is mainly dry cleaners and auto bodies are the main folks that we're seeing with that. So when we made the changes in May, we failed to kind of maintain accuracy regarding these VSQGs, and a lot of these changes are to include them in our haz waste regulations. So let's go. Yeah. So like I said, a lot of this is based on the VSQGs that generate F1, 2, 4, or 5 waste, additions into the table of contents in 262. Some changes also in subpart B in regards to the electronic manifest that we failed to include back in May. In 26210, under the independent requirements, this is just to clarify that the ID and re-notification requirements for VSQGs that generate more than 3 gallons a year of F1, 2, 4, or 5. We had forgot to include that back in May, and there were some inquiries from the public regarding that, if they had to just notify or re-notify. So this is just kind of clarifying that for the regulated community. So,
David?
yes, sir. Yeah.
So on line 70 or 71,
Uh-huh.
should it also scratch large quantity and small quantity? Is it just applicable to?
No, they're still required to get EPID numbers and re-notify. There's different avenues for them to re-notify. The large quantity generators do it every other year based on their biennial reporting requirement. And then starting in 2021, the small quantity generators and very small quantity generators that meet this bill, the F1, 2, or 4, F1, 2, 4, or 5 generators will also have to start re-notifying in 2021 along with the small quantity generators. So.
And David, with the question, because there were some very small quantity generators that were confused that they might have to comply even though they wouldn't.
Right.
Because
It
they
looked,
don't generate.
the way it was written, it looked like they didn't have to notify, but they had to re-notify. So we just want to clarify that it's the VSQGs with the 3 gallons or more. So we can keep scrolling through. That's good. We just added hazardous to the waste here to clarify that it was hazardous waste, not solid waste. That was brought to our attention by somebody from the public.
Sorry, David, one quick question.
Yeah.
Maybe it's my own confusion. See, when I read like line 65 applies to very small quantity generators, but you also include requirements for large and small quantity. And then when you go to small quantity, you also include large and very small.
Oh, yeah.
I just thought it was a little confusing. I thought it should only apply. You understand?
I got it. Yeah, that's something we should probably strike. What do you guys think? Chris and Randy, does that make sense?
Well, that's section 262.18. That's the title of the section, which applies to all 3 categories.
Okay. I guess when I just first read it, my apologies.
Right.
I just thought it applied to large quantity, so it should only mention large quantity, and then the portion that was very small would apply to very small. But if
I think we're just changing the title of section 262.18 so that incorporates that part about the VSQGs.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's just the title. When you go to 262.18, the title reads exactly like it reads now in line 69 there. And so while that first section does only apply to independent requirements for VSQG, 2 only applies to SQGs. It is just restating the title of 262.18.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
So here we're just changing some of the lettering for 262.15 under line 146. And then one of the things that we forgot in regards to satellite accumulation areas is that they are required. Somebody only works in the satellite accumulation area, not the 180-day or 90-day area. They are required to be trained. So that was an omission on our part.
Sorry, to go back to line 155, is that supposed to read 262.16B9?
It is.
Okay. Because everywhere else you'd corrected 9 to be 10.
I think that should be correct.
And that's supposed to be 9. Okay.
They're double checking that one just for sure. Like I said, we're going to be, I think we'll be finding these type of kind of issues, I guess, for the time being. But for the most part, I think we've captured most of them. There will be informational on some more fixes that we have coming in February, but I think it's just going to be a process with the amount of changes that occurred. So is that correct, the 9B?
Yeah, 262.16B9 is the emergency procedures. And in 262.15, we're referencing the training requirements, which is 262.16B9. That is correct.
And here at 216, we're just clarifying that the acute hazardous waste is, if it's accumulated by a small quantity generator, greater than 2.2 pounds, or the residues of contaminated soil water greater than 220 pounds. We have failed to include this in May, and it should have been part of that in the beginning. So kind of scroll. Just more small changes to the regs here. Changing, we shouldn't have included EPA and a lot of the stuff. It should have read the department, so there's changes in that regard. For 262.17 for the large quantity generators, our regulations always read that they had to have both classroom instruction and or online training, computer-based, and it only said or in the previous regulations. So we just wanted to be consistent what we had in the regulations prior to the changes. Once again, including the very small quantity generators that generate F1, 2, 4, or 5, changes from EPA to the department. You can scroll down, Randy. Some more small changes, typo changes there. So 262, 230, this is for the episodic generation. We just wanted to clarify that if a facility bumps to an LQG the first time, they do not have to buy on a report. However, if they continue that more than once per month in a calendar year, that they are required to do the buy-on reporting. So that was just a clarification here. Line 297 is just a change of the wording. And I think that's, we're getting close to the end here. Some more clarifications, and I think that's about it.
Could you skip? Talk about the change on
130.
130.
On line 130?
Yeah, the penalty.
Oh, okay. So 130, one of the talks about conditions for exemption from a permit, and that facility would become a illegal storage facility, illegal disposal facility if they're not meeting the conditions for exemption. We're just clarifying that we take enforcement discretion in regards to how we give our penalties. Typically doesn't go straight to illegal storage or disposal. We kind of use rationale on based on what kind of violations we see, that they're not out of violation of having a permit, but maybe out of violation for some other requirements within the regulations.
Commissioners, any questions? Other questions? All righty, hearing none, entertain a motion.
You have to take public comment.
Public comment. No blue cards?
No blue cards.
Still no blue cards?
So for clarification, David, this is more stringent than the federal rule?
In general for everything,
Yes.
some of it is, especially the VSQG notification requirements. Some of the stuff is just, we are basically lining up with the federal regulations, making sure we're, everything is correct and makes sense, I guess. But for the most part, most of it is more stringent if it's based on the VSQG stuff.
I think for purposes of adoption, you want to use the more stringent
Number one.
language.
Okay. All right. So, let's see.
All right. Hearing no public comment.
You'll entertain a motion.
Motion.
So I move that we adopt the proposed rules regarding amendment of 6 CCR 1007-3, Part 262, regulations pertaining to hazardous waste generator improvements, rule amendments, and the accompanying statement of basis and purpose.
Second. We have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Approved. Let's go on to our second order of new business. And I think I actually have the right agenda up now, so that'll teach me for trying to go paperless. So it's a rulemaking hearing for the amendment to 6 CCR 1007-2, Part 1, Sections 1.2, 1.8, 5.5, 7.2, and 9.3 regulations pertaining to solid waste sites and facilities, correcting the typographical errors and outdated references.
All right, good morning, Commissioners. My name is Randy Perella. I work in the Solid Waste Compliance Assurance Unit for the division, and I'm a paralegal with the division. What I'm here this morning to talk to you about is 6 corrections in the solid waste regulations. And I'll just jump into, go through them in order here. The first one, the definition of groundwater protection standard in section 1.2 of the regulations. The change being made to the definition is to delete the reference to, just deleting the reference to 8 in 5 CCR 1002-8. If you look at the solid waste or the water quality regulations, you will not find a 1002-8 anymore. Their regulations were renumbered. What was previously 5 CCR 1002-8, surface water classification and numeric standards for river basin and groundwater, was actually divided out into 5 CCR 1002-31 through 1002-42, as the Water Quality Commission developed separate classifications and numeric standards for the various river basins in Colorado. So we're just deleting the reference to 8, and we're keeping 5 CCR 1002 to reference the water quality standards. But that is it for the first change. The second change is in section 1.92, paragraph F. And paragraph F is being modified to clarify that the department may settle claims for both administrative or civil penalties, and also changing the penalty amount from the listed $2,000 to the $10,000 amount per violation per day. And that change was part of the House Bill 09-1056, which was adopted and gave the department administrative penalty authority and also increased the penalty amount that could be assessed. Section 1.94 is being amended, paragraph B, also to clarify that the penalty amount was going up from $2,000 to $10,000. Moving on to section 5.57 in the asbestos waste management regulations, and double little paragraph I of E2E is just being modified to change the reference and this is on line 97, from 5.5.7 E2. The correct citation is 5.57 E3. So just a minor correction there. The next one, section 7.2.2 in the transfer station regulations, paragraph B4 is being modified. Right now it reads where public dumping is allowing. Should actually read where public dumping is allowed. So that's the correction being made there in B4. Moving on to the sixth and final correction in section 9.3.5 of section 9, the waste impoundments. In this section, if you look at the current regulations, it went from 9.3.5 E, and then the next paragraph was numbered as H. So we're just remodifying HI as F and G for those two paragraphs. And I did want to point out one other correction in the statement of basis and purpose on page 2, line 38. Inadvertently reads revision of section 7.7.2, and we'd like to modify that. It should be 7.2.2. That is all the revisions we're proposing at this time. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Mr. Gillette.
Yes, on 7.2, the operating plan criteria. When I saw that, I went, what? So right now, the way this reads is that transfer stations would have to have, if they service commercial and passenger vehicles, you'd have to have 2 roads. I'm not sure that's the intent of this.
I would have to maybe agree with you on that. Like I said,
because I don't think I have millions of dollars for roads. Because we have transfer stations that one road serves the commercial and passenger vehicles, such as the Estes Park transfer station.
Right.
And there's only room for one road.
And I would have to look into when the Section 7 rules were adopted. I don't know if the intent was to have separate areas for commercial vehicles coming in versus public vehicles coming into the transfer station.
Well, I've visited a number of transfer stations in this state. I'd say there's a hell of a lot of transfer stations that are going to need some modification if this is the intent. And I cannot see this going through because this has an unintended consequence.
Well, do you want to?
Yeah.
Okay.
Joe Shefflin, Program Manager for the Solid Waste and Materials Management Program. So I think what I'd like to do here, Commissioner Gillette, is to go ahead and have you all process this rulemaking as you see fit. And then with the commitment on our part that we're going to go back and look at that requirement, go back through the original, if we can find it, the original statement of basis and purpose where we added that requirement, figure out what the intent of that whole rule section is, and then come back to you with some kind of a either further change or maybe striking that or modifying it to clarify what the intent is. And then we can consider that in a separate.
Because I'm sure we would have more than just me as a.
I feel confident that you're correct in that statement.
Yeah,
so,
and just to clarify what Joe's saying too, the intent of the rulemaking, the revision ahead of you, in front of you, is just changing allowing to allowed. It's not adding that.
Right.
That requirement's currently in the regulation.
Right.
And effective.
Right. But you're right. It doesn't make sense as written on face value. So we need to go back and figure out what's going on. So we'll do that.
I would appreciate that.
Yeah, sure.
Any other questions?
Public comment? So it sounds like we have the potential for a complex motion.
Well, just to be clear, what's on the what's part of the rule now says where public dumping is allowing separate access for passenger vehicles shall be provided. So what's on the table today is only changing allowing to allowed. You don't have authority today to make any other changes to this provision because it wasn't noticed to the public.
So what I heard is a request to modify the basis and purpose.
Yes.
For a typographical error. And what I also heard is the potential to request a review of section 7.2 and come back with a recommendation for 7.2B4, 7.22B4.
So that request doesn't need to be in the motion, though.
That does not have to be in the motion.
Separate.
I'd be happy to make the motion, Jim.
All right, go for it.
I move that we adopt proposed rules regarding amendment of 6 CCR 1007-2, Part 1, Sections 1.2, 1.9, 5.5, 7.2, and 9.3, regulations pertaining to solid waste sites and facilities, correction of typographical errors and outdated references, along with the amended statement of basis and purpose.
Need to include, what about the basis?
What about
and
this?
purpose?
She referenced it as the amended statement of basis and purpose, so I think that covers it.
Do we have a
Second it.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll pass that. And then we'll just make a recommendation for Department to come back and address the concerns with 7.22B4, addressing the issue about separate access for passenger vehicles being provided.
Mr. Chairman, we might also want to ask if there's any other locations in the regulations that would maybe have similar kind of a statement, perhaps for landfills or other regulated entities.
Sounds like a good thing to ask. We'll do that. Okay, so that wraps up our formal rulemaking for today. We'll move on to informational briefings at this point. And I think the first one up is the hazardous waste electronic manifest requirements.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Doug Knapp. I'm with the Hazardous Waste Program. I'll be doing the next couple of informational briefings. Today, I want to talk to you about the electronic manifest system user fee rule. If you remember last October, we passed the initial phase of the e-manifest rule. That's basically a system that's implemented, run by EPA to start using electronic manifests for the purpose of tracking waste shipments to their ultimate disposal. So the Electronic Manifest Establishment Act, which was the act by Congress which tasked EPA to go develop and implement this system, basically was the public rule, and I think I talked about last October that rule took over 10 years to really come to promulgation. There was a lot of details associated with it, but we have they have that system up and running as of today. It was actually implemented in June, so they're starting to use these manifests. So it's finally coming to bear of what they set out in that rule. One thing in that rule, it did not set out the fee system that would provide for paying for that system, both through its development and implementation. So the rule simply said that EPA needed to figure out how to set that fee. So in 2016, they did put out this rule, basically that talked about the fee system and who's going to be charged for it and who pays and who doesn't. Just a brief reminder that, again, we adopted the first phase of the electronic manifest rule in October 17 last year. So we already have many pieces of that rule already in our regulations. Manifests, either paper or electronic, continue to be used to track shipments of hazardous waste from the generator site to the ultimate site of its destination facility or the receipt. in January, they came out with this fee system. Again, like the first phase of the rule, there is certain provisions of the rule that we need to adopt into our state rule. The nice way of putting it is they want people to be aware that they have to submit final manifests to the EPA system and that they have to pay fees. The not so nice is that it's a requirement of our state program. We have to adopt it to stay authorized, and we have to have a consistent rule with the federal rule. So the user manifest or the e-manifest system rule gets into talking about the methodology, how they determine the fee system for the rule, defines who pays for that, and it describes what happens if you don't make your payment. There was some changes to the manifest form. They have also established the e-manifest advisory board. I'll talk briefly about that. And then there is a few requirements that aren't really related to the fee that they threw in with the final rule, simply to make the system work better, and I'll talk about that. And then finally, I'll get into some of the amendments that are going to be in our regulations. So the fee methodology is a methodology that EPA came up with. It's based on not only the development costs of the system and the operation, but all the overhead costs. It even talks about funding the advisory board. So the system itself has to the money that's generated by the manifest going into the system has to actually pay for the system, including its implementation. And again, that's implemented by the federal agency, EPA, not the state. So there is, within the rule, as I mentioned last October, there's an incentive for people to start shifting to electronic manifests versus the paper manifest. You'll see that in their system. It essentially incentivizes you to pay to do electronically if you can, because you're going to end up paying more and more. And in fact, in a couple years, it even gets boosted up even higher if you continue to use paper manifests. They do have to go back and revise this fee. They do that every 2 years with a 90-day notice. But again, the fee is going to be based on how many people are actually using the system, putting manifests into it, and then that triggers revision of those fees every 2 years. And again, there's requirements for how you make that payment and what happens if you don't make the payment on time. This is an estimated cost for the manifest that came out last year. There has been an update to that, but essentially mailed paper manifests are going to cost you $15. It was $20 when they were first looking at it. Uploaded images, $10. Data file uploads, $6.50. So all those, you're going to spend more to file paper manifests, or you can just put it in the electronic system. They have 4. It actually went up to $5 to do the electronic manifest, but it's about $5 per manifest. Sure.
What do they mean by hybrid manifest?
Yeah, so a hybrid manifest is something they came out with in the rule. It's basically a combination of a paper and electronic manifest. The TSDs or your receiving facilities are going to be the ones that are actually putting the final copy into the system. But a lot of the generators haven't shifted over, so they're using paper. So hybrid simply refers to the manifest that started as paper and then becomes electronic somewhere along the way. So they're letting you, they're giving some time for the generators to adjust for paper, and then hopefully and not penalizing them with a higher fee at this point, because ultimately it's getting put in there as an electronic copy by the final TSD. So who pays for it? Again, it's designated facility. It's the receiving facility. This includes permitted hazardous waste treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. It also includes facilities that may accept state-only waste or PCB waste. Those people also use manifests. And what these facilities have to do is submit the final copy of the manifest into the system, and that's what triggers the fee. That's the transaction fee, is what they're calling that. The good part, of course, for state government is that we can use that system to access manifests as we need to look at them for looking at facilities, looking at waste trends. We don't have to pay into the system. It's simply put on the users of the system, which will be your endpoint TSDs. So what happens if you don't pay? Basically, they started billing. They started in June, the end of June 2018. And basically, the first month they received, I think, a couple hundred manifests, and then the next month it jumped up to 50,000. So people were kind of holding on. So those bills starting going out. You have to pay within 30 days. You pay into an electronic system run by the Department of Treasury, and then they can be charged penalties. I think it's I forget their penalty matrix, but you'll start to pay on late if you've paying your manifest fees late, or it is still subject to RCRA enforcement action since it's a condition of your hazardous waste shipment.
Doug, if there's a RCRA enforcement action, that rolls back to you guys, right?
It could, and that's one reason why we need to adopt these is yeah, we may be in a position someday to, if someone's not paying their manifest fees, that we would take that action. And ultimately it'd probably go back to EPA, but essentially without that, only the feds can enforce the manifest fee rules as it stands right now. So there was a change to the manifest form. You've probably seen the uniform hazardous waste manifest form. It's always been a 6-copy form. But since they eliminated the copy going to your state agency, they've gone to a 5-page form. We in Colorado, I'd mentioned last time that we don't request copies of people's manifests for the state. So it was really a no never mind for us, but we will have access to the system. They're going to the 5-page form, so they've eliminated one of the copies that go on the manifest. As I mentioned, they formed an e-manifest advisory board. That advisory board has state people on it who will be looking at it. They'll look at how the fee changes through the years. It's a complex formula that they've come up. Again, it's based on how many manifests are actually entered into the system. But they also guide the manifest system with EPA. EPA runs it. They'll meet occasionally with the advisory board, and they look at audits and budgets and system, and they're hoping to keep that process transparent with the states.
What, if any, impact does this have on the generator's obligation to get a return copy of the manifest in 35 days?
So one of the copies in the new manifest form actually has to go back to the goes back to the generator. They have to complete the entire shipment within 90 days. And I don't think that's really changed. If you don't get it back, you still have to investigate it. Yeah. And you still have to do manifest for rejected loads, and there's some procedures on who pays for that final, but they're still going to keep it with the.
So would there be a way then, because a lot of that gets entered in comment sections on the manifest, would you still be able to document that in this electronic system?
Yes. And so I mentioned these non-fee related issues, but there was some changes to the rule to address just that there needed to be a requirement to allow changes during the shipment if they had to fix that. They needed to allow generators to make corrections electronically after the fact. And so they've added these provisions in this fee rule, even though they're not really associated with the fee, but it's all addressed at what you're trying to get at is the system needs to be workable to the generators and the TSDs, and they need to be able to correct those, should they need to do that, because again, they're holding people to that 90 days. Otherwise there needs to be investigation. So. And I mentioned too, the combination of the paper electronic manifest or the hybrid manifest is something I think they've done that to kind of ease the practicalities of getting people to start using electronic. But a lot of them start out paper, and then they'll be switched to the electronic at your TSD. So if we look at what types of changes that are needed to our regulations, again, the system, since it's run by the EPA, we're looking to adopt and largely reference these requirements in EPA, but there is certain requirements that we have to adopt. For instance, in Part 260, it talks about that you have to complete manifest. It talks about that you're going to have to pay the EPA into this fee system. The 262 requirements really just are on the generator. Generator has to use a manifest to ship it to a TSD. Same with the transport requirements. Transporters have to use manifest. They're one of the 5 copies. And then for permitted interim status requirements, TSDs that are accepting, or shipping off waste have to use the manifest and pay into the system as well. So those types of changes will largely be adopted from the federal rule right into our regulations. We're not really changing any of those. But instead there is some extensive requirements where we're just going to largely reference the 40 CFR in our regulations. But again, we don't implement this. It's really to make people aware that they have to use the manifest system and they have to pay. And with that, I can answer questions or comments on the rule.
Any of these fees come back to Colorado?
No, the fees don't come back to the states. The fees are there to run the system. But that system includes a help desk kind of thing. And so, states may use that. The public can use that. So it funds that, but none of the fees are coming back to the states. It's entirely for the system.
Enforcement can fall back on Colorado.
If we have to take enforcement action to chase someone down on a for not paying on their manifest, that could involve a penalty. Again, that would go into the general fund, not in the Colorado Haz Waste coffers.
Is 50,000 a month sort of the normal number?
I don't think so. I think that was people were holding on to theirs the first month, see if the thing worked or didn't collapse, and then everyone submitted the second month. So I think what EPA said is they're thinking more around 20 to 30. Yeah, still quite a bit. It's every manifest, but we'll get better numbers as they hope as the system irons itself out. That's why they're going to adjust the fee system, because the fee system's based on how many manifests are in it. So they're hoping that gets normalized after a year, and then they can really home in on what the fees.
Curiosity, how many of those are from Colorado?
That I don't know. We could try to find that out, but we should have access to the system and see. We've got at least 2, both Clean Harbors and Veolia, and then Safety Cleans. You're using a lot of manifests, so I'd imagine it's probably a couple thousand.
And have you had any feedback about, do people like this system?
Yeah.
Do they not like it? Is it an improvement?
From all indication, it's supposed to be an improvement. I think it's supposed to save a lot of people money. They've put some figures in the rule about how many millions this will save. I think from the TSD standpoint, it's saving a lot of money, but for the generators who don't have these systems, it's you're going to pay, and the fee, of course, while the TSDs are paying for it, they're just bumping that fee down to the generators. So I haven't heard a lot from the generators. I know with the TSDs, it's they like it. They've had these systems for a long time, and so it's not really a big deal for them. But for your individual generators, it's probably a transition that they're going to have to do eventually. But I think the TSDs offer them a lot of that in their service, and like I said, if the use isn't over 75% in 3 years from now, they plan on even making it more burdensome to use paper. So they'll up that fee, and then they'll probably continue to lower the electronic fee. So it's going to get to the point where it doesn't make sense to keep using paper.
But they're going to leave that as an option. It'll just be more, they're going to try and disincentivize it, but it'll be available.
They will, but they have a goal after 5 years to no longer use it. So I think just to say that they'll, continue to accept them, I think is wrong. I think in 5 years they want to be done with paper, and they're given that transition period with a 3-year pivoting fee change where you'll see a huge increase in paper.
I think two other questions.
Sure.
One is, does this help at all with some of the manifesting errors? Because I haven't seen the system, so I'm assuming you have to pick a proper DOT shipping name, and some of the creative abbreviations I saw working at a hazardous waste facility wouldn't be an option. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to have defaults. I haven't looked at it myself, but it's in the rule they talked about. It won't let you make certain errors, and so I think it's taken some of that out. Well, I'm sure they're going to still have to comb out certain errors, and they'll probably make additional changes to the form to kind of prevent those forms. But it has been designed to try to eliminate you putting in a wrong information in certain sections.
Thank you. And then the second question would be along the lines of, there are a lot of TSDs that have generators utilizing hazardous waste manifest for non-hazardous waste, for example, waste oil, some of the other things that go out under that direction. So this really can be done for those types of wastes as well, or used for those types of wastes?
Yeah, not only I think can it be done, it's expected that it will be done. So I mentioned Part 260. They amended that in 2 places. One for hazardous waste shipments, but then in the second part also for any state-only waste. For example, used oil, very small quantity generator, where the states have been more stringent than the feds. They're expected to comply with the manifest system. The only thing it's not covering at this point is exports of hazardous waste shipments. They don't have the system capability yet to do that, so exports still need to be done in paper. Yeah.
Questions? Doug, thank you.
Sure.
See you in February.
Yeah.
Commissioners, I know a number of you have been here since earlier this morning. Lunch is over there. Do we want to break or push on? If we do push on, I think it'll only be one more.
Let's push on while we
Push on.
get the table.
All right. Well, we have standards for the management of used oil. We have an informational briefing there. Still done.
So it's still me. So I want to talk about some changes we'd like to make to Part 279 of our regulations. Those are used oil management standards. In general, that section assumes that used oil be recycled, so it's a less stringent in terms of requirements for managing used oil. Again, if you decide to dispose of used oil, well, then it gets kicked back to regular hazardous waste. You got to make a hazardous waste determination on it, for instance, as a solid waste. But if you plan to recycle it, you're allowed to use and store and accumulate used oil under the Part 279 standards. And they're really applicable to generators of used oil, transporters, processors, people mixing and blending, burners, and marketers of used oil. So we'd like to make propose some changes to Part 279. There's some minor typographical technical changes, really just word errors that we've kind of had out there for a while that we'd just like to fix. We would like to adopt some standard language from the federal regulation regarding used oil with PCBs in it. And then there is a provision in there that talks about very small quantity generators. If they mix a listed hazardous waste with their used oil, that they can also, at least at this point in accordance with Part 279, manage that as used oil instead of hazardous waste. And we'd like to eliminate that provision. So just briefly, the standard language for PCBs mixed with used oil, this is right from the feds, but the state only has authority for PCBs that are 50 parts per million or less. 50 parts per million or more are regulated under TSCA, as you may know, and not RCRA. So we don't have authority of it, but they added a small paragraph into Part 279 that clarifies the federal authority. And we'd like to adopt that federal language. to be consistent with 40 CFR. The used oil amendment allowing mixing of a very small quantity generator used oil with a mixed waste is found in 279.10B3. It's simply a liner that says, you know, used oil mixed with listed waste can be managed under Part 279. What this means is under this regime and under the federal regime is you could actually take your P-listed waste as a very small quantity generator, mix it with your used oil, and still be, you know, still manage it in accordance with those used oil requirements, not have to comply with requirements for hazardous waste management under your generator requirements. However, when we adopted the, let's see, so under federal regulations, both for, as you may know, large quantity and small quantity generator, the first thing you learn in RCRA is you can't mix a listed waste with another hazardous waste or solid waste, because then the whole mixture is a listed hazardous waste. However, and also under our regs, you can take characteristic hazardous waste, mix it with your used or mix it with used oil or solid waste. If it no longer exhibits that characteristic, you can manage it as used oil, or you can even manage solid waste as just solid waste. Again, if the characteristic disappears, that would be for characteristic waste or even a listed waste that's listed solely for its characteristic. But under the federal rule, again, this provision is allowed because they largely don't, well, they don't care really so much about very small quantity generator waste, as we saw with the collection facilities. Their primary concern that it's safely disposed of. And this is an area that Colorado has historically been more stringent. So when we did the generator improvement rule, there was a requirement in there that talked about this mixing. It didn't include the mixture rule for very small quantity generators that it did for small quantity and large quantity. We went ahead and changed it in that rule adoption. So our 262.13F is a very small quantity generator requirement, where we put in there, if you mix a listed waste with your used oil, you got to manage it as a listed waste. We didn't change the Part 279 requirement because we weren't exactly focused on that with the generator improvement rule. And another thing is with our generator improvement rule, we didn't draw attention to that specific change. So we just want to make it clear that, you know, why we did change that in the generator rule. We now have a conflict between Part 262 and 279 that we didn't maybe draw enough attention to in that with the last hearing with the generator improvement rule.
So Doug, are you talking about all listed waste, or are you primarily focused on like F003 that's really in there because of its ignitability?
Well, if you have a listed waste that's only listed for characteristic, you can still mix it, and if the resulting mixture doesn't, you know, continue to have the characteristic, well, then it's no longer listed. So we're not talking about that for those things that are ignitable, reactive, or corrosive, but things like that are toxic, or that there's already listings listed for toxicity. Those things would continue to be listed. At least that's what we would like to do. So, for instance, we would like to take that 279.10B3 provision out, eliminate it, so it makes it clear that if you mix used oil or mix your listed waste with your used oil, then you need to continue to meet the very small quantity generator requirements. We believe this is necessary really to protect human health and the environment. There's a couple scenarios of mismanagement of listed waste. For one thing, if you take a P or U listed and put it in your used oil, if you spill your used oil, it's just like you might as well be spilling your P listed waste. Also, many people take their used oil and they'll burn it in you know, their garage in a used oil burner. If you're throwing acute hazardous waste into there, then you're potentially burning stuff that's probably not very good for you. So there's a couple scenarios that we think it's really important that the VSQs, regardless of the fact that it's a small volume, should still be held to the mixture rule. Just as solid waste and large, or I'm sorry, small quantity generator and large quantity generator wastes are already held to that. We're not aware of anyone doing this. We don't know of any of the people affected by the used oil that are doing this. If someone's doing it and they're passing it off to their used oil recycler, they're probably not telling them. But nonetheless, it was allowed. We made changes with the generator improvement rule. Now we have a conflict with it between the Part 279 and the Part 262 requirements. So we'd like to eliminate the Part 279 exemption and basically make it across the board. We're planning to just do a normal rulemaking process with this, where it is noticed to the public, and then we would bring it to the commission here. But I think we're also interested in your feedback, since it wasn't specifically noticed. It was in the red line strikeout of the rules for the generator improvement rule, but we didn't draw maybe as enough attention to it as we could have. So we were open to suggestions if you didn't think that we could just follow the normal rulemaking procedures. And that's it.
This isn't going to affect household hazardous.
No, this is actual very small quantity generator, so not household waste.
People burning in the garage.
No, if you're running a business, out of your garage, then yeah, it would if you're actually doing that. But again, we don't know. Garages aren't really managing, your typical P-listed waste or U-listed waste. They may have some solvents that they may be putting in there. But the used oil vendors that'll come around and pick it up, they're always screening for TOX, and if you have chlorinateds in there, they'll reject your used oil. So it's really not something that's probably being done a lot, but we just want to make it clear that it's not a good idea.
You referenced a case or cases of potential abuse that.
No, we don't know of anyone who's actually doing it. It's just with the federal rule, it allows for it because they're largely overlooking how VSQG waste is managed. So again, all they care about on the federal level is make sure you dispose of VSQG waste properly, whereas at the state we regulate VSQ management of waste. There's requirements for minimizing threats to the environment with your waste. There's requirements for notification for certain F-listed waste. And so the state requirements have always, there's also the collection program that we talked about where we've switched, we're now authorizing VSQG collection facilities. So we just want it to be clear that it's not allowed in Colorado.
Other questions?
Hey, Doug, can you go back, excuse me, to the PCB slide? If
Yeah.
less than 50 parts per million.
Yeah.
PCB. So you're not TSCA regulated. What does this change?
It doesn't. All it's saying is that the feds who run TSCA, if you have 50 ppm PCBs in your waste, then that's regulated by the feds. If it's 50 ppm or less, then we'll regulate it under RCRA or under Colorado Hazardous Waste regs.
But it's still considered a used oil?
I'm not sure about that. I think if you're over 50 ppm, I know there's requirements on where it can be incinerated and stuff. I'm not sure about that. I don't think so. I think there's more stringent requirements for used oil management or PCB. It'd be considered a PCB waste under TSCA versus a used oil. Whereas our regs, it would be regulated as a hazardous waste unless we'd say, okay, go make a waste determination on that. If it's a hazardous waste with less than 50 ppm, then it would be regulated as haz waste.
But if it's just a used oil with 2 parts per million PCBs, how would you guys regulate it?
We would say make a waste characterization determination on it. If it's not hazard, you could manage it as
still
used
be
oil.
used oil.
probably still be used oil, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Questions? Do lunch. Okay, so that brings us back at 12:35. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, they were all enthusiastic.
They just had a question on the slide.
Yeah. I think there's a way that they can.
Okay.
You just put my options after.
That's fair. I mean, I've never done this. Well, it's funny because I didn't
The guy from
Yeah.
solid waste, liquid waste.
So what's the next thing?
It is.
The guy, it's not.
So we're not giving it
Right there in the heart of
That's just information. That's
That was the used oil one.
Yeah, so e-manifest. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it would be interesting to access it, to see how it works, right?
So yeah, it used to be Walmart.
Oh, that's good. It'll be.
So it's an interesting thing about people who fail to do that. Right, because you can go after them for penalty of state law. But programs fee has to send to the federal treasury. That would be
There's stuff.
But this is, we have to have it in there because this operates in lieu of the federal requirement, so we have to have it in state law. State law. So that's why we need to put it in. Yeah.
You're right.
I don't want to. I mean, that's just, I do not want to be.
It's another sound.
Well, it's not just.
The one that just got out of service.
Oh.
They haven't done either.
Well, I like them.
Yeah.
It's that one. There was another one. The one that they launched in the last couple of years. That is just.
Oh.
Yeah.
So I did international, but they overcome that.
Yeah, I guess, again, I do not want to get involved in manifesting, we're trying to figure out how to get it. Treasury, I don't know.
Keep going. That's funny because it's just one of those guys.
If they haven't paid it, but that has not. And so, yeah, and then they can make that billing thing, but not, that has also. You ever have.
Yeah, that's because what you're looking at, other people used to, yeah, it's on the outside. You're right, it's all the brushed up stuff. You really see it now. You can't. You have Kurt screaming tonight. It's one in the morning.
You're off the map. Yes.
No, I'm just saying.
Well, that's a little bit different.
You got something to hold over.
Our land took. There we go.
And again,
Well, don't worry about that.
So how's work? Just okay, not wonderful? There, I understand what you're saying. Where at? Nebraska? Oh. Or private.
Usually.
Okay, I didn't know you would hear them. Yeah, as one of my staff members texted me.
Because that's a little, you know what, though? It seems like now, like, I think they're on that channel.
Yeah.
Everything anymore.
There's no cameras.
Water and all that out there?
There must not, I think it is only voices.
Okay.
Could be.
And a year ago,
Yeah.
And people listen.
I know. I had no idea.
Kinda like,
I'm sorry
who does that?
that she was that because they never really mentioned it. So I didn't know, like, it used to be the old days where they'd like anybody on the call or whatever. So all of a sudden I got a note from her that said it was a question. So I was like, I had no idea you were even on.
So what's your background?
So I worked at the health department. I worked with Joe back from 93 to 2000. And I was in the federal facilities group.
Okay.
So Doug and I hired on at about the same time. Then I went out and worked with CH2M Hill out of Rocky Flats.
Oh, gotcha.
So then I helped.
So you know Joan Swinski?
Yeah.
And Fred Dow?
Yeah. Well, so Gary hired me. At the time, yeah, it was kind of Gary, Fred, and Joan.
Yep.
And so Joe was part of the Rocky Flats cleanup group, and this was I and Gunderson and those guys. So in 2000, I went to work for the dark side. So I went out and did some demo work. So I was out there until we cleaned it up in about 2005.
There we go.
And then I did some demo work for a couple years. And now Tri-State, it's kind of like Excel, but we're rural.
Gotcha.
So I've been there 11 years.
Do you like it?
It's okay. I mean, it's a very, what I like is I've got water waste and mining, so it's pretty diverse, and we've become obviously much more diverse as well.
Yes.
You know, we're 30+% renewable, only going up. Obviously, coal's on its way out. We've got natural gas and solar and wind, so we're in kind of a 5-state region. So it's entertaining. It's
More up
interesting.
north then?
Well, our headquarters is right on 116th and Huron, but we have our big plant in Craig, Colorado, smaller plant in Nuclear, Colorado. We've got plants in Arizona and New Mexico as well.
Gotcha.
Most of the
You don't own
Wyoming.
Powderhorn, or is that, what was the name of that place? Rawhide is what I'm thinking of.
Oh, Rawhide?
Who's that belong to?
I thought that was Excel.
Okay.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
So, you know, it's an interesting time
Yeah.
in the utility world, because, you know, whether it's regulation or just the fact that natural gas is so ridiculously cheap, it's pretty much pushed coal out of the market.
Well, and I still think too, there's a lot of misunderstanding too about on the public side, because we get into this all the time, that some of these alternative and renewables, they're hard to store. You can't store, they're good
Yeah, you still need a
supplementals, but you
base
can't,
load.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can't store them. So
Yeah.
solar and wind are not
our
primary.
Not the
sources.
end all just yet.
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there will be a day.
Mhm.
But yeah, in the meantime,
Oh, yeah.
we still need that base load.
And in 2006,
Okay, so that is,
yeah, up by Wellington. I have a public meeting up there.
I can't believe this week is
A week from
Thanksgiving already. I'm
Thursday.
still wondering what happens.
I can't wait to go.
Goes fast.
Build it here. You know how that goes.
why here? Is that for you?
Is this new position a recent development? or-
So
I'm
that's
such a
Tara.
whirlwind there. I
She,
barely get my feet on the ground, and it's,
that's Tara.
so I got hired in to handle the
Daughter?
Oldest daughter.
Yeah, and this is a Harris's hop. And it was so cool. It was just amazing. He was her prop, and he travels in his box.
And so within, I don't know.
He travels in air cargo with dogs and whatever, and totally, I think it's a she, Willow,
Oh,
and she's totally relaxed.
wow, that's
Yeah.
cool.
And some of us got to put the glove and whatever, and have it on our arm.
And then pretty
Did
soon
you
the
go
city
kill
manager
a
office
seagull?
had a whole new division
No, unlike
under the strategic.
That's what I wanted. So-
Unlike the people, the Rocky Mountain Raptor people who spoke to Swana in whatever,
So then
2013.
they tapped me.
And we all had to be seated and quiet, I think, before the birds. Yeah, this one is totally people oriented. About how it works. I don't know if your coworker, Steve Harris, let me tell you about the element of surprise. What it is. These guys don't know which F-110 white
I was actually surprised at how many things that we passed
come out.
rules for the Board of Health that don't.
So the balls are all hanging out, and all of a sudden, one ordered F-110 releases.
That really bothers me.
And that alone,
Yes, I'm sure.
it was fascinating. And finding the right bird for the right job.
Yes.
And her organization comes out to your landfill or your transfer station or your industrial facility and studies it for what are the problems, what do we need, and she'll do all the assessment before she actually engages or starts charging for X number of visits or whatever it's going to take during migration season or whatever season.
I wonder if they do crows and things like that.
They do. They do.
Yes.
Hardest one is turkey vultures,
We don't have
and
turkey
they
vultures.
use golden eagles
Contracts for a while.
in Canada. They're allowed, they're
So
authorized to use
our
golden
new
eagles.
president was the
And
first
that's the only
president to
thing
ever
that
have all
can take care of
these.
turkey vulture.
Wow.
And the other thing they do for turkey vultures,
They brought him in.
let me tell you this,
No,
they'll
I,
make an effigy. They'll take 3 turkey vultures, kill them,
And he called all the senior, the
have them
directors
stuffed.
and said,
They take 3 of them, clean them up
we're
together,
all three
they all
separation. I
eat,
hate
you
these
know.
things, so don't expect
Take
another
them
one
on
to
the
land.
ground. The other birds, the other turkey vultures see them and say,
Because
we're
we
out
want
of here.
younger, he said that, we want younger.
Wow.
They just think, oh my gosh, what happened to Fred and Sue and Jane? Something's
Yes.
wrong. We're out of here.
So I
It was
talked to my
amazing.
financial team.
So everything
Decided
from,
to-
you know, too many
It's funny
sparrows
because
to
I helped
Whatever.
turkey vultures.
So we're,
Right birds.
we're thinking of inviting them
But then if you get
to Estes Park because they have.
that's what I was worried about. It's like, lose everything.
Yeah.
And there was a
Okay.
And
Man,
sure, if we, Steve arranges, that would be.
yeah, I would love
Sure.
to. And
We'll invite this.
So I'm
But
glad
all
she-
younger.
Yeah, they're all.
All millennials?
Yeah.
oh, so there's no massacre.
Yeah.
The hog comes out, takes one gulp, takes it down.
Yep.
Doesn't
And you can hire
kill
more of them.
Might injure it, but doesn't
Might be
kill
harder
the
to
not
keep
the
them,
intention.
Yeah,
Easier to
that's the
hire.
thing is they're not going to retire there.
Handler comes out, covers up the bird, the
So I
hawk
did
goes
a
back to the
2-year
truck,
stint at a
bird goes
marijuana
away, and
which was,
that bird,
very
Tells
successful
everyone,
at a marijuana
hey, there's a
yeah,
badass over
cultivator,
here.
Yeah.
and they have some
it's the
stores.
element of
Yeah,
surprise.
this whole-
Like, they don't come every morning at 10 o'clock and release, because all the birds are like, oh, 10 o'clock, oh yeah.
Different times.
Different time, the birds learn so quickly.
But that
Things, yeah.
Wow.
Have to
dealing
change
with
it
the
up.
workforce that uses their product.
Yeah, which means.
So it's like
Overuses their
50
product.
dates. Today we're going to talk about wearing safety glasses. Today we're going to wear about safety glasses.
They're chewing something and you know
Who?
it.
Yeah.
I fired 4 people in 2 years, and I think it's all.
Oh, Dad.
Or I think
Stupid thing is.
on our board, on
Yeah.
this one board.
So.
So
He
waste
has a bird
management,
problem.
right.
Yeah, waste management. He has a bird problem somewhere, and I said, so I wanted to see her do her
I was kind of like, if I started to
see
take a
this
polygraph,
bird
it would be going like this.
in action. She said the bird is going to be really disappointed when she opens it up because it's just going to be in a room full of people. Getting ready to do its thing.
Not the old days.
Well, that's Dr. Jason.
So she's coming down, so then you see her put one behind her ear.
To do it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Behind her ear.
Because,
That makes
And then
sense.
she
Yeah.
at one point walks out the door.
and I know, like I said, we have two sites.
She's got the car and so that's.
And then we can sort of appease the bird lovers.
It's right there.
So you're not supposed to use it or steal it, right?
Especially.
As soon as
they
fly out, they can do whatever.
And I
Yeah.
mean,
I can't
get
say
$100
verbatim that
every
I
month
do
to
not
buy it.
kill, but
So stealing it is really stupid. But it's just.
But that's
they're
not
only
their
millennials,
intent.
they're buying more than-
To a massive.
in fact, she describes something that's environmentally friendly. They'll take a paintball gun,
Typically like.
frozen paintballs. They'll, if they need to, they can do this. They can
There's some private
shoot
things.
it at one bird.
But they.
That bird alone going down, or
Not
hovering, flying around with big
buy
red.
anything that has to do with actually growing the plants. Like you had a loan to buy
We're out
the
of here.
lamps.
Really?
That happened to Fred. We don't
It's a
want to
really
be here.
direct payroll, just basic
Isn't that amazing?
expenditures like buying equipment. I have my own credit card and I would pay for my credit card.
They always have.
Payroll was.
Tria's right.
But our company paid, if you bank, you pay for something as a suspicious activity reporting, SARS. So usually the financial institution requires you to do an audit every year on your facility. They want to make sure you're in compliance. So we were one of the ones that banked, but the thing that was frustrating for me, I wouldn't have done this if I were younger too, because if you wanted to go buy a car, it was still easy enough to get a loan. But as soon as they find out, and typically the whole industry works, they're LLCs. So we had an LLC for the real estate and an LLC for the operations. And if
I was
you
so jazzed.
on your application, you're trying to buy a house or a larger, that you work
yeah.
for, this was Sweetwater.
There's
As
Julie.
soon as they find out it's tied to cannabis,
You're done.
you won't get one. So,
Oh,
luckily, I wasn't in that scenario, but you have to go find a non-way of getting a loan. They could technically. And I was always a little afraid, like I talked to my lawyer before I started my job.
Well, Steve
all
told me
the assets I would keep.
the last was the best.
Would they take those, or would they just?
Well, the
take-
second to last was the best.
Especially when Jeff said.
So she invited me.
Oh, yeah.
That got my attention. And again, I think it's sad because I think there's a lot of people that are trying to like grow up. It's going to be here. Let's do it right. They don't do food inspection on Denver does.
Yeah, that's
What was it about?
And they didn't start doing field testing on medical until just
By one of the vendors.
just recreational testing.
But he could not.
Doing this as medicine, that would have been the first one you started.
Sure.
But it just,
No.
that just got enacted last year.
Well,
He was very
Just
much
now starting to fire testing.
upstate through the.
Are these businesses really profitable?
Probably not as
what
much
we
as
need
people
to
think,
do
because they can't write off any of their expenses.
is to prevent the last person being
Why? Because they can't
whatever.
show up on.
There's a rule called H80.
Is that when we do the $500
down in Florida?
or something?
Longevity award. I think.
He claimed that his.
I mean, I had to leave because I had a previous thing, but
They will take it. They will take it.
I have in my head now, I was jumping around to leave. Now I'm pretty firm what it's going to
You're
be.
paying most of these kids minimum wage.
A lot of them are getting, they're between like 13 and 15.
So it'll probably be
Chemistry,
2022, like January or February.
ergonomics is going to be a huge issue at some juncture.
After that, I mean, I'm gonna turn 70. I'm gonna be done before I'm 70. Not for any particular reason, but I say that, it depends on where we are with the landfill.
The licensing fees though and the rigor and what you have to do.
Yes,
I mean, now that
absolutely.
you've gone through the hard part.
Talk about additional taxes now.
Really hard part.
That one passed.
No, the hard part,
I don't think court is good.
I think, will be,
I don't, and I
I
don't
mean,
think
when
it's-
the master plan will be adopted, most likely here December 19th. It's the public process to actually cite the, to get the go-ahead,
So I had no clue.
the public
And
meeting.
they were opening a fourth one in,
Because you have to go get
then you
butchered
open
several
in
times.
that, they're opening in Massachusetts.
Are you the main?
Just last.
Yeah, they try to-
I worked right up until.
They try to protect me, but I just
First week in January.
tell people, come on in, I don't care.
But you have good rapport.
We have all these old facilities that are closing.
I just
down,
tell
right?
them,
Western
you
Slope.
know, it's not a rose garden.
Economic redevelopment. First thing they think
Oh,
of.
we're gonna build a bale field. We're not gonna have blowing trash.
Those guys were paying where most warehouse
That
square footage.
right there quiets a lot of people.
$6 a square foot. We were paying 15.
Wow.
And
That's because of the risk associated.
What is
with
Department's
it.
success with the bale field?
I don't know if it's not a little bit of gouging.
Are they
Now in
still
Denver,
doing bale
there's
field?
more.
No,
too, so
we
you're
shut it
landlord.
down and went to a compactor.
You can't just pick up.
Bale fields are more expensive.
Okay, so to answer
But-
the question, after I've thought
Sorry.
about it and had some
If there's a
lunch,
reason for it,
so you cannot,
wind, yeah. We're close to Wyoming.
when you sit up here, you are
Right there.
sitting here, like,
Tells it all.
not like with your staff as a commissioner. And so that's kind of getting influence from outside.
I would say that site is approximately,
But if she has a question, you can't ask it through, so she's just.
30 miles?
There's no way for her to ask during the hearing, but she can always contact the presenter.
that's pretty close.
So in this case, she can contact Doug.
Matter of fact, it's closer
After
to
the
that.
hearing and ask for that kind of.
Probably
Bale
wouldn't.
will never shut down.
Okay. I
Yeah,
mean, she didn't really even ask. I
Everything
just didn't.
that's gonna go in there is gonna be already pre-baled,
yeah,
except for
yeah, I mean, it's mostly just
C and
like
D
you're
residual.
Got
here
it.
on your own.
Process.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah,
I just want to make sure before I got too far.
Yeah, no.
It's not gonna have paper
To
and
fill
stuff.
in. Oh, this looks tasty.
There's a lot of hydroponic.
Hopefully, there's no fill in between the bales.
Stuff we were
It's
using.
on the edges.
Yeah.
And as you finish a lift,
Yeah.
Because it had a little plastic can.
So you know that Waste Management has had a bale field.
So I think with the diversion rates, the car.
And
They're gonna contribute.
I've never
significantly.
found out for sure why they change that except.
It was expensive.
And transportation, coming all the way to Salt Lake City.
How far was it?
Bales.
See, ours is gonna be
And they also are really weird.
28.
They'll join together for things, but they're also almost paranoid about.
It was fascinating to see.
Makes you paranoid.
We used to do the monitoring.
They can.
Business owners.
Pulling more his own in pot.
Our whole executive
Valley.
team,
Where's that?
there was only one
West
vice
Salt Lake
president.
City over that mountain range, the Stansbury Mountains.
And I knew.
It's on the one and only
I was
road
at-
down to.
Yeah, our Aurora store did about.
Is it,
$1 million every 10 days.
Private?
W.
And
Or
they only
public?
allow recreational in Aurora because.
They have a lot of public sites in Utah.
So Aurora is prohibited.
It's W.
And I was sitting out working on some stuff and I went out with the store manager, came back.
But I don't think the public would ever show
I was
up
literally
there.
filled up.
It's so fun.
Went to Taco
Just like
Bell.
And I looked over at him and I could tell he was like a little paranoid because he knows I don't. He looked at me and goes, "What?" I don't think that I was looking at him. But I was looking at him.
Yeah.
Well, because it'll all be veiled.
It'd be interesting to see whether it does get changed.
What's the next, what's the minimum distance from?
It's starting to get more
current
normal.
Yeah. Right.
How close is it to being encroached upon?
By a house or do you mean a town?
A town, a development.
Probably 6 miles.
Oh. And it's gonna be closer to your new house. Yes.
Well, it is, but I'm in a different county. I'm in Republic.
Oh.
I live in Weld County, who will be succeeding from Colorado. Polis tries to pull his, he's already talking about restrictions on oil wells. I don't think that would go over too well.
No.
I really
I don't know
don't.
this thing with
You didn't get it,
Pueblo though.
No. No, I don't think.
Oh, we never had those interpretation things. I'm like, yeah, watch out. Yeah, we're fighting. They don't want to call them incinerators, and it's like, wait. It's like, well, but it's you don't use a flame. You use whatever. Yeah. So they're like all pissed off right now. First, they want their permit, yesterday, and it's like they haven't even submitted their application.
Opposition out there?
No, I think people are pretty tired of it already, but
Yeah.
you never know until we go out to some of our
They'll
hearings,
show up.
and then, yeah, I mean, back in 2000, with the ag
I have been.
community down
I
there,
have been.
I mean, they're not,
Just finished.
it's not like they're technical or whatever, they're just worried about the stigma. How it's gonna affect our products.
Oh, yeah.
Nothing we can do about it. But, yeah, it's a mess, that plant.
Well, what's left of their?
Oh, the whole thing. They can't keep the equipment running. It's like chewing up.
Didn't they have a directive to be done by
Yeah,
whatever year?
yeah.
Like back
2012 on.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's a mess. The equipment's just not holding up on the equipment. It's just all that stuff's so corrosive, and the solids that are in the round, it's like sandpaper. So you got high heat, you got corrosive stuff, and then sandpaper. Right?
Did they see that in the pilot though?
They did, but they kind of blew it off, and they're like, they were told about this the whole time. So there's Bechtel courses. They get paid to design it.
Yeah,
They get
they
paid
make all the
to
money.
fix it now that it's broken. It's like, so yeah, they're like, they're trying to say, we didn't see that, but the incinerator plants do it.
Well, weren't they mimicking off of, was it Untitled or something?
Aberdeen.
Yeah.
Aberdeen, yeah. They are, but Aberdeen didn't have any projectiles. They only had the ton containers, so Yeah, the equipment is, I mean, they've made some bonehead mistakes, like forgetting to put that they forgot to put caustic in the scrubber. So they started processing these suits, they weren't waste yet, but it's like, yeah, guys, that breaks down the HCl. It's like,
How do you do that? Don't you have a feedback mechanism?
Yeah, they were like, oh,
don't you have to have an operating?
well, they put water in it. And they're like, oh, we'll get it running.
In this day and age,
I mean, don't you have a CH meter that tells you whether or not it can run or not run? And
they've got about 500 PhDs down there that didn't figure that one out.
Well, that's part of the problem. Are you presenting next?
I am.
Are
Yeah.
you? So you should have some meat.
Oh, I already ate.
Sorry, go eat.
This is my second.
Because we're going to get started.
Okay.
I gotta go grab some more water.
Way to keep him on task, Jen.
More water, more water.
You what, you got somewhere to go?
She's handing me
Oh, tonight? Still be 2 minutes.
Okay.
What else is on the agenda?
Love my in-laws.
Yes, 3 more informational meetings and some updates.
Well, they're on a plane right
Trying
now.
to figure out how this bleeds into 3 o'clock. Yeah, although thankfully I appreciated this week because the traffic's lighter, right? Yeah, I totally agree. Especially, well, I had to be here at 9, so the worst time to come down here is about 8 o'clock.
You're getting the overtime for
it. Yeah, sure.
I would give you one of mine. And try to say, well, you shut down when I was on holiday. Well, my phone's working.
No, nobody cares if we shut down, did it? The wind will be blowing.
There you go, in the sunshine.
Yeah, somewhere.
It's like a startup deal, so the people like, yeah, I listened to some, and they were saying we should be totally solar. And I'm like, well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then we have wind. What wind is
What do you mean? So I have these three.
Yes, because the shit's found out
Yeah,
there.
yeah, it's still a fair, I mean, there will be a day. Envision the day, it's just not here.
Yes.
That's just that one.
That's
You
just
can't arbitrarily make it here.
Huge lithium batteries.
That's the reason we're doing that one.
Or something.
What is it, they've always
We
been.
just forgot
We
to
just
put it
forgot
in.
to put that in there. And the reason for changing this one is because if you put 18 in there, it looks like for all VSQGs, and it really is only gonna, 18 is only gonna apply to these guys.
So really, we're just we're taking it out of the top and moving it.
And clarifying that it's for these guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it didn't say that before, it just said and 18, which would apply to all VSQGs.
Yeah, so we're just putting it in the last. In fact, I took your language, very small, Jones.
Yeah. Because remember, see, it being up here, this applies to all
everything,
very small client generators. And so if you put 18 in there, it would have meant that they had to re-notify and revert back to
Yeah,
that same
although
problem.
I looked at 18 and really the only thing they would have had to do
Re-notify.
is get an EPIG number.
Yeah,
because
but
the-
that's notification. The only way you get an EPA ID number
Oh,
is
is that
through
right?
notification. Yeah.
That's why you changed that.
Yeah.
All right, so let's continue with our briefings. Going to talk about the hazardous waste generator improvement.
Yes, so I have another change. I know David talked about a bunch of changes we made that were making corrections to the generator improvement rule. And this is simply another correction. It's just that, one, we didn't find it in time to include with this rulemaking, and two, it's a little more involved than just a typo or something. So, as you all know, we adopted the general improvement rule June, or at the May Commission meeting. It became effective in June. And as we talked about, in Colorado, we have a very small quantity generator requirements that are more stringent than the federal requirements. I mentioned the safe waste management shall basically manage your waste to minimize release or, fires or explosions with your waste. There's notification and fees for certain F listed waste. If you're a very small quantity generator managing F1, 2, 4 or 5. If you're managing 3 gallons or more per year, then you have to notify us, and you're also there's more extensive requirement. There's a fee requirement for those those VSQs. That's about 800 very small quantity generators in the state of Colorado that actually pay a fee for their waste. There's also a completion for self-certification checklist, which is something we've done with the very small quantity generator class of generators as well, and then episodic generation. And then I did want to say one thing on the episodic generation. I know we had asked last time about where we were with this as far as following up with the individual from Coors Miller that came to the hearing, but we have reached out to him. Unfortunately, didn't get contact back from him. But what we did, our inspectors, David in particular, took that and solicited comments on the road at our training with over 600-700 people. We got, I think, 3 comments out of that regarding episodic generation, and really no one really raising concerns for what we did. So with that, we probably won't pursue any more kind of trying to solicit comment on that. But I think if it's warranted, we can always come back and visit that again.
Thanks for following up on that.
Sure. So as I mentioned, when we adopted the generator improvement rule, we retained a bunch of more stringent conditions in our regulation than the federal rule. David really highlighted many of those. Today, though, I want to talk about 262.14 specifically. That's the conditions for exemption for a very small quantity generator. If you want to be exempt from a big part of the regulations, you can manage your waste in accordance with the very small quantity generator exemption requirements. The first of which is really managing a small amount, about a 55-gallon drum a month. But you have to comply. Unfortunately, when we adopted those, we made some mistakes with 262.14 because of our more stringent conditions, and that's what I want to talk about correcting today. As 262.14 currently reads, it requires all VSQs to comply with our Part 263 standards, the transporter requirement standards. It exempts them from our self-certification request. As I mentioned, we do that with all our VSQs. If the division issues a self-certification request, the facilities are supposed to complete that and return it. And it also requires all VSQs, hazardous waste generators, not just the F1, 2, 4, and 5 generators, but all of them to comply with the re-notification and EPA ID numbers of 26018. So we'd like to correct that. Here's the requirement as it stands. As you can see, it's kind of complicated, so I'll kind of take you slowly through this. But so the Part 263 requirements, very small quantity generators under both the federal regulations and our Colorado hazardous waste regulations, they've never had to manifest their waste as the requirement now says they need to. We want to fix that. We originally retained that 263 language in there because of the transfer facilities. If you remember with the very small quantity generator collection facilities, the division historically viewed those as transfer facilities. That wasn't correct per EPA, and we've since done an authorization program for those collection facilities. So now we want to eliminate reference to 263 requirements, or we want to make it so Part 263 is not applicable to very small quantity generators. Self-certification checklist, that's always been a requirement really since 2006. It was passed by this commission for over a decade ago, but we've had great success with that self-certification program. And really in another part of the regs, they're already required to submit the certification. 262.14 is unclear then, and it's inconsistent with 262.10A1IE, which says you need to comply with the self-certification checklist if you receive one. So we want to fix that as well. And then lastly, the requirement as we worded it, looks like it applies to all very small quantity generators. It's really only the 3 gallons or more per year of certain F-listed waste that have to get an EPID number and get a notification to us. We want to clarify that requirement. So again, that requirement's been applicable since May of 2006 when that was passed at the commission. So what the requirement looks like is we'd like to amend it. You'll notice that it's not in the affirmative. It's saying you're exempt from all these requirements of these. So we simply removed removed the reference to 262.18. We put that down below. So it's just applicable to those generators. And then we got rid of and parts 264. So now if you follow the very small quantity generator requirements, you're exempt from everything from 262 except for those requirements, which are your exemption requirements, through part 268. So that includes 263. Now you will no longer you're no longer be subject to that as a very small quantity generator, the manifest requirement. Yep.
Can I ask Doug, 'cause,
Sure.
I'm aging myself again. But I was on the stakeholder group at one point where we actually started charging fees of conditionally exempt. And I think the intent of the group was if they're requiring some administration from the department, they should be paying into the system. So now with that being a reduced number of people that are paying into the system, is there going to be a potential for a budget shortfall? Because there's a lot of conditionally exempt as opposed to not so many large quantities.
Yeah. So I guess what I was trying to say is that we didn't have a fee for all very small quantity generators, only the ones with F1, 2, 4, 5. And so that's how it worked until May of this year when we adopted the generator improvement rule. Unfortunately, the way we worded the requirement, it looks like it applied to all. So we're really just restoring it to what it has always been. It's not going to change any of the fee volume. And then lastly, I just note that we added 262.43, our self-certification requirement, to the requirements that very small quantity generators do have to comply with. So that probably a lot of words for very few changes, but that's what we would like it to look like, and we'll propose that in February. And I can answer questions.
Is there any stakeholder interest in any of these changes?
We didn't feel like there'd be particular interest in this one with stakeholders, again, because we're really just fixing it to what it was prior to our messing it up with the generator improvement rule. Again, we're not changing anything that wasn't already required in May. It's just the way we changed the rule is we've now made it say something different than what it said in May for very small quantity generators.
Did you get any feedback about that from folks that then got pulled in? Or?
I think we were getting some calls with questions saying, hey, this didn't apply before, and now it looks like, the way this is worded, even though it's in another section of the reg, it's confusing. And yeah, so there was some calls. I think people confused as to what the requirements were and, where we changing requirements. But again, I don't think we're not changing anything that wasn't already in existence. We're just correcting the error that we made when we did that.
Else? Are you waste grease as well?
I'm not waste grease. Except for what I'm putting in my stomach.